After 2 years of low contact, my ex-wife who married another man just months after our divorce reached out and invited me to talk only to reveal one of the kids I've been paying child support for years isn't really mine. I laughed in her face when she said she still expects me to pay and told her to find a lawyer ASAP. I'm here on Reddit today because I am at a loss for words. My ex-wife Jane and I got divorced 3 years ago. Looking back, the reason for our split was pretty straightforward. Jane and I just weren't compatible as a couple. It became clear that we had very different ideas about what a marriage should look like. Jane wanted an open marriage. She wanted the freedom to explore friendships with other people while still being married to me. On the other hand, I believed in commitment and exclusivity. I thought marriage meant sticking with one person through good times and bad. It wasn't something I could compromise on, and that's where the trouble started. Things reached a breaking point at Jane's birthday party. I'll never forget it. What should have been a simple celebration turned into a public ambush. Jane had invited some of her friends who, it turned out, were there to gang up on me to try and convince me to let Jane sleep around. During the party, a few of them cornered me and started lecturing me about how I was handling my marriage. They accused me of being controlling and overdramatic just because I didn't agree with Jane's desire to sleep with other men. One of them even called me a prude, as if that's an insult. What hurt the most wasn't just what they said. It was that Jane had clearly put them up to it. It felt like she wanted to embarrass me into going along with her wishes. To make matters worse, we had a young son at the time. Jane was already a mother, yet she was fixated on pursuing the idea of experimenting with other men. I couldn't understand how she could prioritize that over the family we had built together. It was a heartbreaking moment that made me realize we were on completely different pages about what mattered in life. After Jane's birthday party fiasco, I decided I couldn't let things continue as they were. Later that evening, I sat her down and made it clear, if she was truly that desperate for an open marriage, then it was time for us to end our relationship. I told her plainly that we might as well get a divorce. At first, Jane tried to argue with me. She attempted to backtrack, saying that I was taking things too far and that a divorce would ruin our son's life. Then her tone changed. She started making threats, saying that if I went through with a divorce, she would make sure to turn our son against me. She implied she'd manipulate him into believing I was the bad guy who had hurt and abandoned her. But despite her attempts to intimidate me, I stood firm. I wasn't afraid of her threats. I had always had a strong bond with my son, and I knew that I had been a good father to him. We spent plenty of quality time together, and he knew how much I cared for him. I was confident that no matter what Jane tried to tell him, he would see through it in the long run. I believed in the strength of our relationship, and I wasn't going to let fear of her manipulation stop me from doing what I knew was right for myself and ultimately for our family. So I filed for divorce and contacted a lawyer to get the process started. Just 2 weeks after filing, something unexpected happened. We found out that Jane was pregnant. This news caught me off guard. It hadn't even crossed my mind that this might happen, but when I thought about it, it made sense. Although our relationship had been falling apart, we had still been intimate occasionally up until the big fight at her birthday party. I didn't question whether or not the baby was mine. It never even occurred to me to doubt it. Jane, for her part, was quick to assure me that the baby was definitely mine. She seemed almost happy about the situation, thinking it would change everything. Jane was convinced that the pregnancy would somehow stop the divorce. She acted like this baby would magically fix our broken relationship, as if it would force me to stay with her. But I quickly made it clear that wasn't going to happen. I told her flat out that while I would always be a present father for my children and would take care of my responsibilities, including paying child support, I had no interest in staying married to her. Her pregnancy didn't change the fact that our relationship was toxic and incompatible. At first, Jane didn't take the divorce well at all. She threw multiple tantrums and made things as difficult as possible for me. During the first 3 months after we separated while she was staying with her parents, she was incredibly hostile towards me. She went out of her way to make things challenging, especially when it came to our son. She tried to keep me away from him, using every excuse in the book to not let me see him. It was a rough period, but eventually, the courts intervened and made the custody arrangements official. We were granted equal custody, which gave me the chance to spend just as much time with my son as Jane did. Once the divorce was finalized, I was finally free from Jane. I felt like I could breathe again. I could focus on rebuilding my life, putting more energy into my work, and finding a sense of normalcy. Meanwhile, Jane started dating and seemed to have found herself a new man, Milo, while she was pregnant with my child. On the day our baby was born, she refused to let me into the delivery room. Instead, Milo was the only person allowed to be by her side. I can't even describe how heartbreaking that was for me. No matter what had happened between Jane and me, I still cared deeply about being present for such an important moment, yet she shut me out entirely. Anyways, after the birth of the baby, I followed the court's orders and started paying child support for both my son and my new daughter. Despite everything, I was determined to provide for my children and be an active father in their lives. Meanwhile, Jane and Milo's relationship seemed to progress at lightning speed. Just a few months after our divorce had been finalized, they got married. I'll admit, I was surprised at how quickly it all happened, especially since Jane had just had a baby. But at the end of the day, it wasn't my business. For the past 2 years, Jane and I have kept things pretty low contact, and, honestly, that's been for the best. We only communicate through a co-parenting app, and even then, it's strictly about the logistics of our parenting responsibilities. Beyond that, we've essentially stayed out of each other's lives. I hired a nanny specifically to handle the pickups and drop-offs of our children. When it's time for them to go to Jane's house or come back to mine, the nanny takes care of it. That way, I don't have to see Jane at all, which keeps things peaceful. One thing to note is that throughout all this, my son has repeatedly come to me with complaints about how Jane and her husband, Milo, treat him compared to his younger sister. He's told me that they seem to favor her over him. According to him, Jane and Milo go out of their way to give our daughter better treatment. They buy her more expensive gifts. They're quicker to agree to whatever she asks for, and they're more attentive to her needs. Meanwhile, they often dismiss or ignore his requests and seem to put him second. Hearing this from my son has been really upsetting. Couple of times I've tried to address this issue with Jane. I approached her calmly, hoping we could have an honest discussion about making sure both kids are treated equally. But every time I've brought it up, she shuts the conversation down. She either denies it outright or brushes me off saying I'm exaggerating or that my son is overthinking things. Since I haven't been able to get through to her, I've done what I can to make up for it on my end. When my son is with me, I go out of my way to ensure he feels valued and heard. If there's something he wants, I do my best to get it for him. Whether it's a special toy, a day out doing his favorite activity, or just spending quality time together, I make sure he knows he's loved and appreciated. I'm also careful not to neglect my daughter. She's just a child after all and is not to be blamed here. But I do make a point of compensating for what my son feels he's missing when he's at Jane's house. Now on to what happened recently. Last week, I got an when I answered, her voice was trembling, and she told me her husband, Milo, had been in a terrible car accident and had been rushed to the hospital. She sounded frantic and desperate, which was completely out of character for her. She asked if I could come and pick up the kids so that she could focus on being there for him, and I agreed immediately. I rushed over to get the kids, and Jane headed straight to the hospital. A few hours later, we received the devastating news. Milo had succumbed to his injuries and passed away. It was a heartbreaking moment. Despite everything that had happened between Jane and me in the past, I felt terrible for her. Losing someone so suddenly and tragically is a pain no one should have to endure. I offered her my condolences and assured her I would take care of the kids so that she could have the time and space she needed to grieve. For the next few days, I kept the kids with me, doing my best to keep things as normal and comforting as possible for them. This week, Jane reached out to me again. She told me she wanted to talk. It was unusual because in the past few years, we hadn't had more than a 5-minute face-to-face conversation at any given time. I assumed she was still grieving and might need some support with the kids or help navigate this difficult time. So today, I went over to her place with the kids. They were excited to see their mom after spending the week with me. Our son, being older, understands what has happened to Milo. It's been hard for him, but he's coping as best as he can. Our daughter, on the other hand, is still too young to fully grasp the concept of death. We haven't broken the news to her yet, and I wanted to do it carefully with both Jane and me there to explain it together in a way she could understand. Once we arrived, Jane greeted the kids warmly. I could see how much she had missed them. Afterwards, she asked me to step outside so that we could talk privately while the kids stayed inside to play. As we stepped onto the porch, I noticed that Jane seemed different, nervous, almost hesitant. She fidgeted a bit as though she wasn't sure how to start. Finally, she took a deep breath and began to speak. She told me that she had something important to share, something she had kept hidden for a very long time. She described it as a secret that had been weighing on her, something that had made her feel like she's been living a lie. Her words caught me completely off guard. I had no idea where this was going, but I could tell that whatever she was about to say, it wasn't going to be easy for her. I stayed silent as she continued to rant off about how she had wished she had told me this sooner, saying she felt even more guilty now that Milo had passed away. She explained that the weight of this secret had always been suffocating her and that she could no longer continue living with it. I listened intently, growing more confused by the second. What could she possibly be talking about? Finally, I couldn't hold back any longer and asked her directly what she meant, and that's when she confessed I wasn't the biological father of my daughter. Her words hit me like a freight train. Her eyes widened in shock as I tried to process what she was saying. She didn't stop though. Jane went on to explain that Milo hadn't been some stranger she had met after our divorce, as I had led to believe. Instead, she admitted that she had been having an affair with him for a very long time. She admitted that she had kept it hidden because she didn't want to lose me or the comfortable life I provided for her. I stood there, stunned, as my ex looked down in shame, her face red with embarrassment as she continued to explain. Jane told me that back then, she didn't have the guts to leave me. She said she had been more focused on the stability I provided to her, which made her unwilling to face the consequences of her affair. However, when I finally divorced her, she realized she was finally free to be with Milo, and that's exactly why they got together so quickly after our separation. Jane then revealed the part that hurt the most. She told me that when she found out she was pregnant, she knew there was a 50-50 chance that the baby wasn't mine. Despite this, she had prayed that the child would be mine so that she could then get child support from me. She clung to that hope because it was easier than confronting the reality of her actions. After our daughter was born, she says she didn't doubt for a moment that I was the father, at least not initially. But as our daughter started to grow up, Jane began to notice certain features and characteristics that were very similar to Milo. Those similarities nagged at her until she couldn't ignore them any longer. Eventually, she and Milo decided to get a DNA test done behind my back. When the results came in, they confirmed what she had feared but kept hidden. My daughter wasn't biologically mine. She was actually Milo's child. I was absolutely floored when Jane revealed the truth. My daughter wasn't mine? The words echoed in my mind, growing louder with each passing second. Anger and betrayal surged through me all at once. How dare she and Milo keep this secret from me for so many years? For years I had held my daughter, comforted her, nurtured her and poured my heart into being the best father I could be. And now I was being told that she wasn't even my biological child. It wasn't just about biology though. For years, I had paid child support thinking I was doing my duty as a father. I had supported Jane and Milo's household unknowingly funding the very relationship that had betrayed me. And now, after everything, this was how I found out? My head was spinning and my vision blurred as I tried to process the enormity of it all. I couldn't believe it. All I could see was red. Jane continued talking as if trying to justify her actions. She admitted that she had wanted to confess to me sooner, but by then, our daughter already saw me as her father. She claimed she didn't want to break mine and my daughter's hearts. She added that her own family would have looked at her differently if they found out the truth, that she had cheated on me and had children with 2 different men. According to her, it was just easier to let everyone believe that both kids belonged to me. Her excuses only made my blood boil. I couldn't hold back anymore. I yelled at her, my voice trembling with rage. I told her that what she had done to me was the most cruel and heartless thing anyone could do. She had robbed me of the truth, stolen years of my life where I lived under false pretenses, and now she wanted me to feel sympathy for her? Jane tried to argue, saying it had been hard for her too. She claimed that keeping this secret was a heavy burden and she insisted that she had been trying to protect me. Her words only fueled my anger. I looked her in the eye and told her I didn't care about the cheating anymore. I didn't care that she had been unfaithful. What hurt the most wasn't the affair. It was the years of lies that followed. It was the fact that I had been made to believe that my daughter was mine when she wasn't. It was the fact that I had built my life, my love and my fatherhood on a foundation of lies. I told her that had she told me the truth back then, when it happened, I might have been able to forgive her. But now, after years of believing a lie, she was asking me to accept the truth as if it was a small thing. Did she really expect me to react calmly, to just brush this off and move forward as though nothing had changed? I shook my head in disbelief, my frustration boiling over. If this is how things are, I said coldly, then we have nothing more to discuss. My voice was firm, resolute, and carried the weight of the anger I felt. I'll be contacting a lawyer and sorting this out. Jane's eyes widened in alarm as she realized the implications of what I was saying. She stepped forward, her tone shifting from guilt to panic. Why would you need to contact the lawyer? She asked, her voice laced with unease. I looked her dead in the eye and I told her the truth she didn't want to hear. There's no way in hell I'm paying child support for a kid that isn't mine. My voice was sharp and cutting and my anger was barely contained. I was furious. No, livid, that she and Milo had deceived me for so long using my love for a child they both knew wasn't mine to their advantage. Jane immediately tried to argue. Her words spilled out in a rush as she tried to justify her position. You can't just refuse to pay child support, she exclaimed, her tone now pleading and desperate. You've been her father all these years. You've raised her, loved her. How can you just walk away from that? I could hardly believe what I was hearing. The audacity. She had lied to me for years, manipulated me into supporting her and Milo's child, and now she was trying to guilt me into continuing? I felt my anger flare even hotter, but I let her continue her tirade partly out of disbelief and partly because I wanted to hear just how far she was willing to go. Jane argued that it wasn't fair and that I wasn't thinking straight, and she kept repeating that I had been her daughter's father in every way that mattered, so I had no right to suddenly stop being there for her. "This isn't about you or me," she insisted. "It's about our daughter. It would be cruel to just abandon her like this." Her desperation was evident, but I was too enraged to care. Jane pressed on, voice trembling with urgency. She revealed that the only reason she had confessed the truth now was because Milo was gone. "I wanted you to know the truth," she said, "but that doesn't mean I want you to stop being her dad. She loves you. You love her. Why does biology even matter now?" I couldn't help but scoff at her entitlement. The sheer ridiculousness of her reasoning left me stunned. I told her she needed to find a lawyer ASAP, as I was going to be taking her to court for this. She tried to argue that I was being outrageous and how our daughter needed my money every month, especially now that she's a widow and has no job to support her 2 kids. "That's not my problem. You and Milo made this mess," I snapped. "Now you want to lecture me on fairness and keep paying child support? No, absolutely not." I saw the panic deepen in her eyes as she realized I wasn't backing down. She pleaded again, saying that stopping child support would hurt her daughter, but I had no sympathy left to give. I didn't waste another second at Jane's place. I gathered my son and said Jane a quick goodbye. My daughter, innocent and unaware of what was happening between her mother and me, tugged at my hand and asked where I was going. My heart broke a little as I forced myself to say, "You need to stay with your mom for a few days, sweetheart. I need some time to think about a few things." She looked confused and I could feel her eyes following me as I turned and walked away with my son. Jane was in tears, standing by the door begging me not to leave things like this, but I just couldn't. If I stayed any longer, I was afraid of what I might say in the heat of the moment. Jane, clearly panicking, has taken to texting me non-stop since then. She's begging me to think of her daughter, to not abandon her or rip her world apart by my selfish decision. She's pleading with me not to go to a lawyer, and she's reminding me of how devastating it is for her daughter to learn that not only had Milo, her biological father, passed away, but the man she had always called dad wasn't her real father either. I feel sick. The fault of seeing her or my daughter again right now feels unbearable. AITA? Update 1. I completely agree with the comments from others who say that Jane was just trying to get me to keep paying child support for her and Milo's daughter, even though they both knew the truth all along. Now Jane is trying to act like she's entitled to have everything stay the same, but I just can't let that slide. I feel absolutely devastated. There's this overwhelming mix of anger, confusion, and sadness that I can't quite make sense of. I know people might call me in a hole for not accepting Jane's daughter as my own after everything I've learned. I love her. She's been a huge part of my life. I feel completely duped. For years, I've raised her, cared for her, and given her everything she could have wanted. I've loved her as my own, and now to find out that she isn't even mine, it's like I've been living a lie this entire time. I feel like a fool. I feel betrayed, like everything I thought was real has been pulled out from under me. How can I just act like it's nothing after all of this? How do I just look at her and keep pretending? Right now, Jane is still keeping her daughter at her place, and I'm sure she's confused and probably has a million questions. And knowing Jane, she's probably hoping I'll just come around and accept her daughter as my own, like it's all going to be okay. But I can't do that. I can't. It feels wrong, and honestly, I hate the situation I'm in. I hate that I'm even having to deal with this. At this point, I plan on sitting down with a lawyer soon to understand my options. I need to figure out what my next steps are, what's best for me and my son. Only after I've talked to a lawyer will I be able to talk to my son about this. He deserves to know the truth, and I need to figure out how to explain all of this to him without making it worse. I need time. Update 2. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for all your wishes and advice over the past 2 weeks. After everything that has happened, I finally made the decision to hire a very expensive lawyer. This was not easy, both financially and emotionally, but I knew it was necessary if I wanted to fight for my rights. The lawyer I hired is experienced with cases like mine where fathers are lied to and deceived by their wives, who use the father's name on the birth certificate just to secure child support in cases of divorce. Unfortunately, my case isn't unique, and this happens more often than most people realize. It's really heartbreaking to know that someone would go to such lengths to manipulate another person, especially when children are involved. The lawyer explained that since I had already filed for divorce by the time my ex-wife got pregnant, there was a good chance that I might be able to win this case. The timing could work in my favor, and that's a small comfort in this overwhelming situation. At this point, we have 2 main actions to focus on. First, we're going to file a motion to have my name removed from the birth certificate. It's a complicated process, but I'm hopeful that it can be done. Second, we're going to file a lawsuit for paternity fraud. I'm sure there will be a court-ordered paternity test. And if the test results show that my daughter isn't biologically mine, then we will continue to fight for what's fair. According to my lawyer, this is going to take a lot of fight, and we need to be patient. Update 3. Honestly, one of the most difficult parts of all this has been sitting down and talking to my son about all this. He could somewhat sense that something was wrong, and he'd been asking me questions about why his sister hadn't come back home with us. I didn't want to keep anything from him, but I also didn't want to hurt him unnecessarily, so I sat him down and explained things in the simplest terms I could. I told him that there was a possibility that his sister wasn't biologically related to me, but that I would always love her just as much as I did before. I needed him to know that even if things weren't as they seemed, my love for him would never change. When I told him this, he was quiet for a moment, and he then said something that broke my heart. He told me that now it made sense why Jane and Milo always treated his sister like she was special and gave her more attention and love. He said he'd always felt like he wasn't good enough, and now it all made sense to him. I hugged him tightly and reassured him that I loved him more than anything, and no matter what happened, he would always have me. Deep down, I felt sick to my stomach to put my son through this. It made me feel even angrier at Jane for keeping these secrets from me and from our son. As for my ex-wife, she has been relentless in trying to contact me. She's been trying to guilt me into seeing things from her perspective. Daughter shouldn't have to grow up without a father figure, and she's pressuring me to just bottle up my feelings and continue to accept her daughter as my own. I haven't responded to any of her messages as per advice from my lawyer. Everything she said, I've been documenting carefully, and I'm making sure that I keep a record of everything for court. Update 4. The truth is out now. Both my family and Jane's family have found out what has been happening. I knew I couldn't keep this secret any longer because if I didn't speak up, Jane would eventually turn the tables and somehow make me the bad guy in all of this. I'm not going to let her manipulate the narrative any further, especially when I've been the one who's been lied to and deceived for all these years. First of all, I got in touch with Jane's parents. They have always treated me kindly, and we have been in touch even after my divorce from Jane. When I told them the truth, they were devastated, just like I was. Jane's father in particular was furious when he learned how she had fooled me. He agreed with me completely that I shouldn't be responsible for paying child support for a child that wasn't mine. It felt like a small relief to have someone in her family at least understand how wrong the situation was and stand up for me. On the other hand, my own parents have a very different perspective. My mom especially is pushing me to accept Jane's daughter as my own. She's comparing this situation to adoption and telling me I should think of Jane's daughter like an adopted child. She's arguing that since I was already in a fatherly role for the child, I should continue to be a part of her family. But the thing is, with adoption, you know exactly what you're getting into. In my case, I was deceived. I was tricked into believing that Jane's daughter was my biological child, and I spent years raising her and providing for her, all the while thinking she was mine. To find out now that she's not feels like a huge betrayal, not just to me, but to my son too. It's not the same as adopting a child. I get where my mom is coming from. They don't want to see a child hurt or feel rejected. But moving forward, I also have to think about what's best for me and my son.